let me introduce my panel to you. Sian Berry is leader of the Green Party. Mark Littlewood is Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs. And we have two LBC contributors, both, I think, are regular callers to this programme. Simon in Southampton and Erin in Scarborough. They're joining our panel today and looking forward to hearing their views on all the questions that you're going to ask them. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can watch us on Global Play. If you're particularly keen to know what Simon in Southampton looks like, that's the place to go. Global Player or the LBC website, YouTube channel, Facebook feed and Twitter feed.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, before we go to our first question, Sian Berry, you've announced that you're stepping down as leader of the Green Party.
I've said I won't be standing in the upcoming leadership by-election, which has been triggered by Jonathan's early departure. And yeah, that's right. I'm sad to be doing it. We were due another whole year. But, you know, when it comes down to it, there are points of principle on which you have to stand, and that's what I had to do for this.
And what was the point of principle? Essentially,
as co-leader, I didn't have, the power to dictate to the party. That's not how we do leadership in the Greens. And there's 2 points here. One is that I didn't manage to convince my colleagues not to select spokespeople who were campaigning within the party to change our policies on trans rights. And I think that sends a mixed message to our trans members that I didn't agree with. And the second thing is, in that failure to convince my colleagues, I failed to do something that's part of my job as leader to prevent these kinds of conflicts from occurring. So I'm holding myself to account for that as well.
Well, that's very good of you to do that. But, I mean, you're going to miss it, are you? Because when you stood for leader originally, or co-leader, I should say, because you obviously have two co-leaders, I think a lot of people placed a lot of trust in you. And you've done, I think a lot of people would say, a good job. And you are one of the party's leading names, and there aren't many people who are national names.
Well, thank you for saying that, Iain. I mean, we've had 3 years, and I think me and Jonathan have got an awful lot done in those 3 years. We've had some extraordinarily successful elections, from the European elections to 2 sets of incredible results in the local elections. We're polling higher than we have been since we took over the job now. So we're leaving the party in a good state. And I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying as a London Assembly member. I fully intend to be London Mayor one day, and to continue to make changes happen and have my voice heard. I'll still be around.
Right, let's go to your calls. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to our panel. Chris is in Croydon. Hello, Chris.
Oh, good evening, Iain. Good evening, panel.
Hi. What would you like to ask, Chris?
Yes, is the panel satisfied that France is doing everything possible to prevent illegal migration from its shores?
Mark Littlewood.
Well, almost certainly it's not doing everything possible, but you probably wouldn't expect them to do everything possible. President Macron's got quite a lot on his plate. I'm inferring from Chris's question that really he means, are they doing a satisfactory job? And I do think that in the Western free world, we do need to have an agreement about the first free port that you get to. Once you've made it from a ghastly part of the world, if you've made it to France or Italy or Germany, I think we now need to stop people transferring within those countries. You can argue about which is the most liberal of those, the most democratic, the most welcoming.
But doesn't that mean that Greece and Italy in particular would have a real, well, they have got a real burden because of the numbers? What you seem to be saying is, well, that's tough. That's the first country, so they have to stay there.
It's a feature of geography for sure. You'll noticed in the United States of America that most Mexicans who get over the border tend to end up in the southern states of the USA. They don't immediately end up in Boston, Massachusetts. That's a feature of geography. There needs to be an international response to that. But once you've made it to one place of safe haven or safe harbour, I think at that point you need to have a much better overall response to how people move beyond that. So I think if you've made it to France, to then try and get over the channel to seek safe haven is pretty extraordinary. Now, you could argue that's our problem as much as President Macron's, and indeed it is. But in terms of asylum seekers, of course you want to be able to give them safe harbour in a liberal democratic environment. But then I think if you're using your resources to police how they move within that environment, that is resources wasted and depleted, not human lives saved.
Simon.
I feel quite strongly about this subject. If you'd have spoken to me and asked me this question, or asked me the question about migrants 6-7 years ago, I would have given you a complete opposite answer to what I'm going to give you now. And I believe that we should actually help these people to come. I don't care whether they're economic migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, whatever. They should all be allowed to come. Because, well, all being, I'm looking at it from a human to human point of view. Now, if when they come, they prove to be somebody that we don't actually want here, then obviously we can take steps to filter out those people, which would presumably happen with the criminal justice procedures anyway. I.e., if they commit crimes, then they will be, they'll come to light. But I think you should give anybody a chance, and it's a compliment that they want to come here. For what it's worth, I'd actually rather live in France. I think, the fact they want to come here is a bit strange, because if I had the choice, and I'm only here because I was born here just through sheer luck, if I had a choice to live somewhere, it certainly wouldn't be this country.
Well, you do have a choice. Nobody's keeping you.
Well, my family, my life is built here. If we were to go right back to the beginning and basics, then if somebody was to say to me, right, you're about to be born, where would you like to live? My choice would be a different country. With regard to the question...
But Simon, what you're giving us is a motherhood and apple pie answer, where you're saying, oh yes, let's welcome in every single person that wants to come here. You know that is not a viable immigration policy, whether you're on the left or the right.
But isn't it? Because at the end of the day, when this is spoken about, it's portrayed that there are millions and millions and millions of people all trying to get here. And the fact is that it's a small, very tiny percentage of people that want to come here. So it's like everything else. If this is being told to you from the perspective of the right-wing narrative, it's a disaster. And we don't want these people in our country. Well, I'm sorry, but, these are human beings, and regardless of their circumstances, how do we know they haven't got things to offer us? And at the moment, bearing in mind what we've just done with Brexit, we need people. And with regard to the question, maybe France could do more. Maybe they could do more. But I was a coach driver in a former life, and these people will always find a way. I've seen them. I've had to get them out of the toilet of my coach. I've had to get them out of the boot of my coach. That if they want to come, they will, out of desperation and sheer determinedness, they will find a way.
OK, let's go to Erin. Let's just remind everyone of the question. Are the French doing their best to prevent illegal migration to the UK? Erin?
No, obviously they aren't, because it doesn't work in their favour. However, I spent many years on the front line working with political asylum seekers and people who had been tortured, people from all over the world. And there has to be something more equitable going on now. It's not equitable. Some countries are getting hammered. Some countries are expected to take a bigger burden. As a global society, and I think post-pandemic, we have to be looking at something much more empathic and something much more rapport between different countries about how we're going to deal with this problem as a world and not as each individual flag-waving country. That's my concept. And I've met these people. I've worked with them for years. I've seen the trauma, everything else, children, you name it. And we can't just abandon swathes of people around the world and say it's France's fault or Greece should take more.
What do you think France could do that they're not doing at the moment, if anything?
I think there could be a lot more negotiation going on all across the world, not just between France and Britain. Again, we're narrowing it right down, and this is a global issue. There needs to be infrastructure in place in these other countries. There needs to be all sorts of solutions on an international level.
But that's what the UK government says, that they have got sort of infrastructure on the ground with regard to Syria in the camps in Lebanon, and we're taking a lot of people from there. And that the government is saying, well, the way to discourage people coming over the channel is to say, well, we take a lot of people from the camps. Now, there is a certain logic to that, isn't there? But, I mean, we have the situation between Britain and France. It's all very well to say, well, it's a global problem. Of course it is. But at the moment, there are somewhere between 300 and 500, 800 people coming in to Dover or other places on the south coast. I heard today 25 people had landed in Falmouth, for example, in Cornwall. This is a problem here and now for the British government.
And what are they going to do? Say that it's France's problem, then France says it's your problem, then Greece says it's their problem. I mean, it's just going round and round in circles, and there's not enough money, there's not enough things gone in, there's not enough help, there's not enough medical treatment, there's not enough anything, counselling services, never mind housing and infrastructure to handle what is going to become an increasing problem globally. It's not just now. It's going to get worse and worse and worse.
Okay.
Especially post-pandemic.
I think just listening to Simon and Erin there, that's just such a humane response from both of them. And that's what we need. We need a humane international policy on refugees and asylum seekers. And it should be based on the principle of how would you want to be treated? Because I think, looking around the world, we can see so many people's homes being destroyed by horrible weather events, by political turmoil. Any of us could be caught up in this stuff, and we have to put a policy in place that works for everybody in a way that's equitable and just, and we need to get in ahead of things before climate refugees become
motherhood and apple pie.
Other problem.
Motherhood and apple pie. You're not addressing the question. Are the French doing their best to prevent illegal migration?
I think the French are doing their best, and let's all agree that we don't want anybody risking their lives getting into unsafe organised crime, organised trips across the Channel. That is what we need to avoid, people risking their lives like that. And I'm sure that the French authorities are doing their best to persuade people to settle in France. But I think
why would they do that? Why wouldn't they think, actually, the more people we can get over to Britain, the better, because we don't have to cope with them then?
I don't think that's what the people working with asylum seekers in France are doing. These people have a good reason to want to be in the UK. That's often a family connection. That's often to do with education or language skills, and we should be welcoming these people in. There are just not that many of us. The idea that we're taking more than our fair share from the camps in Syria and Lebanon, this is untrue. There are countries who've taken orders of magnitude,
not from the
more
camps
people,
not from
and
the
help
camps
them to
We've
resettle.
taken more than every European country, as I understand it, from the camps.
I don't think that's true, Ian. But I mean, we can look at different schemes. But I know that the scheme where local authorities were accepting vulnerable people from Syria, that's wound down now. We are not.
Well, that's because of the pandemic, wasn't it?
We are not doing our bit, and we should be putting together ahead of time before there are millions and millions of climate refugees to deal with as well. International ways to help people once they become refugees, not just to go to the first safe place and live as refugees for the rest of their lives, but to genuinely settle somewhere new and build a life.
Mark Littlewood, you're outnumbered on this one. Do you want to come back on any of that?
I'm very libertarian on this, so I don't really consider myself outnumbered at all. I would love to actually live in a world in which people can move around as freely as goods, services and capital without borders at all. I do think, to Simon's point, I must admit I'm crushed by Simon. When I heard Simon from Southampton was on, I thought that's absolutely great. He's from the greatest city in the world. I wasn't born in Southampton, but I got there as fast as I could. And apparently he wants to move to France. So I'm extremely liberal on this. I don't believe that I'm not worried about the population of the United Kingdom going up. I think we can accommodate many, many more people. I do think we need to distinguish between asylum seekers and economic migrants. It might very well be that you welcome both, but they are different. There is something different about fleeing your lives from either a natural catastrophe that Sian's pointed out, or a war in which your life and limb is immediately at danger. The West needs to give these people safe haven. I think then, whether you're into the nuance of I don't really want to settle in Calais, I'd prefer to settle in Southampton, or if you're on Simon's view, the other way round. I think actually your duty has been discharged by the Western world at that point. Whether discharged by France or by England, at that point you're dealing with economic migration.
As a libertarian, you would want the choice, wouldn't you, of where you settled if you had a cousin or a friend in another country?
Sure, no, my ideal world is open-door immigration across the planet. That is my ideal world. I don't want to stop human beings moving around. That's the ideal. But there is a difference between fleeing for your life from persecution or a catastrophe or the risk you're going to be murdered by your domestic government, and saying, actually, it suits me rather better to live in Dover rather than Calais. There is a distinction there. I think we should prioritise asylum seekers to make sure that they are safe from life and limb, and fleeing persecution, torture or murder is rather different to what might be considered more of an economic or lifestyle preference about where you would prefer to end up. So there are two categories here. We have a duty as decent human beings, I think, first to fulfil the first, those who are fleeing for their lives. There are more complex problems around the second, which I would like to address, and I look forward to living in a world, if I can't do it in my lifetime, in the lifetime of our kids or grandkids, in which everybody can move everywhere as quickly as we can move dollars and sterling around the world at the click of a computer button.
Ian in Surbiton says, Simon wants everyone to come here, but he'd live in France. Strange logic. And text here from Claudio saying the French are doing the same trick that's been done for years to Italy by dumping immigrants to other countries. So it's other countries' problems. We'll move on to a different subject in a moment. Chris, thank you very much indeed for your question. It's 18 minutes past 8.
LBC.
8. Someone on Twitter says, Iain Dale's guests on LBC all want to treat migrants as humans. He's spitting feathers. Well, anybody that's ever listened to my programme will know that that is not true. My role in this programme is to play devil's advocate, and you shouldn't take everything I say as something that I actually believe. I'm as wet as a lettuce on immigration, which if you listen to the programme regularly, you will already know. Now, we have Sian Berry with us, Mark Littlewood from the IEA, and Simon in Southampton and Erin in Scarborough. Tricky question coming up. That's an alert for you all. Nick is in Dulwich. Hello, Nick.
Hello, Ian. Yes,
Hi.
The Northern Ireland Protocol is a bleeding wound in the government side, and the absolute result of the Brexit deal that the government got elected on. And now we're having increasing labour shortages, especially in the haulage industry, which are having a knock-on effect on supermarkets and eventually on other industries too. Isn't it time that the government just swallowed its pride and realised that this is a bad idea, and we rejoin the single market, the customs union, and re-implement freedom of movement, which would do away with all those problems at the drop of a hat and yet still maintain Brexit?
I thought you were asking about the Northern Ireland Protocol, but quite happy to take that question. Sian Berry.
That was quite a very succinct question, laying out a lot of the practical problems.
Basically, the case for rejoining
that we are seeing as a result of Brexit. Yeah, Nick goes right for every single thing there. And in the Greens, we fought like hell against Brexit. We really wanted to have that final say so that the public could, in the light of, 4 years of negotiations, really have that final view on whether or not we left. But now, we are where we are. And at the moment, we are arguing for, as an urgent matter, the Northern Ireland issues to be dealt with. That involves, at the very, very least, an agreement on food and farming safety. That would clear a lot of the blockages there. But ultimately, I think we need to rejoin the customs union as the first step. That would mean, good standards. It would mean far fewer checks at the borders. It would relieve the pressures on the haulage industry. But it's pretty clear that the government does have to go back and renegotiate something. This Northern Ireland question was always going to be a problem. People always warned about this. Now it's a reality. There is going to have to be a renegotiation of something. If we don't get everything all at once, at least we can take that step and relieve these worst problems right now.
OK, Erin.
Well, actually, I lived in Northern Ireland there for about 7 years. And there was a lot of tension, around Brexit and a lot of stress. I lived right on the border with the South, and there was a lot of pressure and a lot of stress on people because they did not want any kind of reversion to hard checks at borders, armed police everywhere, a lot of worry and a lot of stress in the local communities over that. And it has created mayhem, really, and has reignited a lot of the tensions that were obviously under the surface, had been simmering for a while. And so there is a lot of tension around that area. I've just come back actually about a week ago from there, and there is tension, which there was not before, There's a lot of worry.
In terms of the different issues that Nick was talking about there, would you support any move to have some sort of affiliation with the single market or the customs union? I feel as if we're fighting old battles here, but hey.
I think I have absolutely no idea. It just seems like a total confused mess, which was not thought through. Or if it was like Northern Ireland is kind of something else over there. And I don't think it was fully fleshed out, I think. And the difficulty is they say there's now a border in the sea, but I've just gone across that sea and I was told there's only a border there for trucks and goods, but not for me going across. I went across fine. But I know there's now a lot of problems with truck drivers, and I spoke to quite a few of them while I took the opportunity to on the ship. A lot of problems, a lot of backlogs, extra charges, and a complete mess, really. A complete mess of paperwork and extra costs.
But I suppose we should say it's one way. It's anything that's going from mainland Great Britain into Northern Ireland. The reverse journey is, I think I'm right in saying, as simple as it ever was. Mark Littlewood, it's pretty difficult to argue that it isn't a mess in Northern Ireland, isn't it?
It's a complete mess. On Nick's question, he left virtually no can of worms left unopened, I think, on it, that the solution is to rejoin the single market or the customs union. Iain, I'm rather with you. I thought this issue had been put to bed. It was a close call, but there's been a referendum, 2 subsequent general elections. We're out. So here's the problem as I see it, and I stand happily to be corrected if I've got this wrong. Nobody wants a hard border between the north of Ireland and Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. That being the case, it's extremely difficult to impose different regulatory regimes in those 2 territories. You could theoretically build a wall and say, the only things that can move south are things which are single market compliant, and the only things that can move north are things that are UK compliant. But for very understandable and sensible reasons, I think not just humanitarian ones, but a reflection of the recent history of the island of Ireland, nobody wants that hard border. So there's going to be a soft border. That means UK single market stuff that's British compliant, might seep into the European single market and vice versa. That's just true. And if you're really concerned about the absolute sovereignty of your single market, this is going to cause you angst. I would argue, what is the problem we're trying to solve here? Are we really worried that the meat hygiene standards that we apply in the United Kingdom are so abhorrent and terrible that no British sausage must ever make it to Dublin? Or are we so worried that the health and safety standards that the EU are applying to, detergent, are so appalling that no bottle of detergent must ever make it from Dublin to London? I think not at all. So somehow, to unravel this extremely complex and knotty problem, which took actually a huge part of the Brexit negotiation about this particular problem, we've got to have a sensible mutual recognition of standards. We've got to accept it won't be perfect. Some EU single market stuff that we might not like might make it to Belfast. Some Great British standard stuff that they might not think is perfect might make it to County Cork. This is not of itself an enormous problem. What's required is goodwill on both sides.
And that's the problem, isn't it?
I agree, that is a problem. Not some overly technocratic, legalistic arrangement, which I rather agree with Erin, I think is exacerbating the problem, not easing it.
Simon, I'm going to ask you to be uncharacteristically brief on this one because I should explain to our listeners that you've talked a lot about this already on the programme over recent months. You voted Brexit but have come to bitterly regret that decision.
Yeah, because I didn't know what I was voting for. And I'm a textbook example of somebody that should never have been able to have that vote. I voted Leave very quickly with LBC's help, realised I'd made a mistake from listening to the argument from both sides and forming a factual conclusion. So the answer to the question is, let's have a second referendum. Whilst there are people like me in the world, I'll never let it rest because this was stolen from me. But
well, it wasn't stolen from you. You gave your vote away voluntarily. It's not our fault if you didn't inform yourself about the subject beforehand, is it?
Exactly. So this whole thing has happened based on lies and misinformation. And that can't be right. That cannot be right. So for the time being, all right, let's go back to single market, customs union and free movement of people. Absolutely, because then at least we get to benefit from going and living in the EU as well as them coming here. But ideally, second referendum and let's rejoin. Lock, stock and barrel.
You're assuming they would want us back.
Well, I think they probably would. But let's have lock, stock and barrel. Let's have the euro. Let's have an EU army. Because at the end of the day...
This is not going to win the second referendum, I feel.
He has changed his position.
That's quite a switch from being a Leave voter in 2016.
There's nothing like a reform zealot, is there? Simon, thank you very much for that. Keep your calls coming, 0345 6060 973. Nick, I think we got the gist of what you believe from your question, so thank you very much as well. It's 8:31 on LBC News Headlines with Dominic Ellis.
British officials have warned of a potential hijack of a ship off the coast of the United Arab Emirates. The UK Maritime Trade Operations has advised ships near Fujairah to exercise extreme caution. Most of the remaining coronavirus restrictions will be lifted in Scotland from Monday. It means an end to social distancing, although it's still advised. However, the wearing of face coverings in some public spaces will continue. And Boris Johnson won't meet Scotland's First Minister for talks during a visit this week. Nicola Sturgeon had invited the Prime Minister to meet and discuss the recovery after the pandemic. Instead, Mr Johnson has suggested a meeting with other First Ministers at a later date. And the weather, showers will linger in southern areas of England and parts of northwest Scotland tonight, staying dry for most with clear skies, a low of 9 degrees.
LBC.
Let's
Live on LBC, Dave in Southend says, like Simon, I listened to James O'Brien as well, but I still voted leave. Let me reintroduce my panel to you if you've just tuned in. I know a lot of people do at this time. Sian Berry is leader of the Green Party, Mark Littlewood, Director General of the IEA, and we have Simon in Southampton and Erin in Scarborough with us on the panel. If you'd like to watch our proceedings, Global Player is the place to go, or the LBC YouTube channel, LBC website, or Facebook or Twitter feeds. Julie is in Glasgow. Hello, Julie.
Hi, Ian.
Hi, what would you like to ask?
With the Green and the SNP nearing the completion for the coalition, does that mean that the independence for Scotland is inevitable?
Well, apparently there is a deal going on, so there's going to be a formal coalition as opposed to just an agreement. As our northernmost correspondent here, Erin, I'm going to come to you first.
About what?
about what you think of the idea of an SNP Green coalition in Scotland.
Well, that would be beautiful, wouldn't it?
Would it? I don't know.
Yes, it would be wonderful.
Would it make?
But whether
would it make
lead to
independence?
independence or not would be another matter. Because do they have true control to be able to say we're going to go for independence? Are they going to be stymied if they attempt to do that?
Well, I suppose the big question is, if there is a formal coalition, there was then a majority of votes in Scotland for independence, because the Greens support independence and they would support having another referendum. So I suppose it would, from that perspective, make independence more likely.
More likely, perhaps, but will a second referendum be allowed?
Well, that legally,
by the Westminster government.
It has to go through the Westminster government. But do you think if Nicola Sturgeon called one anyway, it should be valid? Because we would be entering a sort of Catalonia situation there, wouldn't we?
We would. Yes, that would create immense problems.
Now, Simon, you are our most southerly member of the panel. If we take Mark's sort of brief foray into Southampton out of this, I mean, what do you think about this idea of a coalition, and what do you think the effect would be?
I like coalitions. I think coalitions are a good thing because one of my issues, I mean, as you're aware, I'm fiercely anti-Tory, and I believe that in order to get ourselves out of this mess, the left has got to form alliances with each other, the parties, in order to defeat the Tories and get rid of them. But coalitions are a good thing. In this instance, I don't want to see Scotland go. I don't want to see the breakup of the union. So anything that is heading towards any form of vote for that, I would actually like to have this situation repaired first. So if they then vote to leave after we've repaired this situation, fair enough. At the moment, they want to go because of Brexit. We shouldn't have Brexit. So get the Tories out, get a coalition, because many hands make light work, many brains and many points of view are a good thing. Sort the problem out, speak for the majority of the people, then let them decide. They may decide they want to stay. OK, Sian Berry.
So a very important point to make is that the Scottish Green Party is a separate party from the Green Party of England and Wales, of which I am the acting leader. And so I can't speak for them. And they have a separate set of policies and leadership up there as well. It's also important to make clear that they've spoken about the fact they're not talking about a coalition. They're talking about potentially a political cooperation agreement, which is much more like what you see in New Zealand, for example, where the Greens there have a number of ministries which they take responsibility for, but they are not taking responsibility for every collective decision made by the government. And you can see that in Scotland there are some clear points of political disagreement between the Greens and the SNP over things like, for example, oil and gas industries. So I don't think you would ever see a coalition. However, the broad principle of parties working together is something that Greens are trying to model in as many places as possible. We do that in the London Assembly, where we've got proportional representation, so lots of different brains are there, as Simon was just pointing out. It's a good thing. We do that in lots of local councils now as well. I think there are something like 17 or 18 local councils where Greens, working with other parties in various flavours of agreements, are running the towns and the cities. And this is a really positive thing for politics. And I would really like to see my sister party, the Scottish Greens, form something like this and start to model how a country can be run in a very, modern and progressive way. I think that would be marvellous.
Mark?
Well, Julie's question was whether this made Scottish independence inevitable. I think I don't have any particular views.
Likely.
Or more likely. I'm quite bring it on the second referendum on Scottish independence, because while Simon wants a second referendum on the EU because he didn't read sufficient number of books before voting in the first one and hadn't listened as intently to James O'Brien before the 2016 referendum, those are not a fundamental change in constitutional circumstances. In fairness, in Scotland, there has been a fundamental change in constitutional circumstances. The previous referendum on independence was held in such a time that if you wished Scotland to remain in the EU, you had to vote for Scotland to remain in the UK. Now, the exact opposite applies. There's no guarantees that Scotland could join the EU if it left the UK, but that's your only shot on the board. Similarly, I would say that in the results in Holyrood and indeed in Westminster elections, parties arguing for a second referendum have performed spectacularly well. Had in the December 2019 general election, the Liberal Democrats scored sort of 32% of the vote, or Anna Soubry and Change UK had swept the board, demanding a second referendum that Simon could vote in, well, I'd have some sympathy for a second referendum on the EU. In fact, those parties died a death. But not in Scotland. The argument for a second referendum there, the constitutional circumstances have changed, and the parties arguing for independence have performed well. I actually wish the British government would say, bring it on. Let's call it now. Let's do it now.
Point of information, Ian, I think in the European elections of 2019, the progressive anti-Brexit parties won a majority of the vote, and between us and we, the Greens,
what was the turnout?
We
Sean,
beat the
Conservatives compared to the general election. What was the turnout?
Oh, it was about 38%.
And the Brexit Party topped the poll. So you need to do it continually.
They did, but I'm saying the balance of votes
Brexit
was
done,
against
the Brexiteers needed to win a referendum. The Conservatives needed to hold in office in 2017 and then win a landslide in 2019. You're right, the Liberal Democrats did well. I think the Greens did quite well in the Euro elections.
Which are proportional to people's actual wishes.
They are actually proportional.
Yeah.
But there wasn't an obvious huge upswing of the British electorate demanding a second referendum in December 2019. It wasn't even obvious that the Labour Party was that committed to holding one. So my point is there is a difference. Yeah. There is a difference. The SNP are clearly topping the poll in every election. The Greens, who are duly a coalition partners or a confidence and supply arrangement, are also in favour of Scottish independence. That, to my mind, is pretty clear and has been done on a number of occasions, not just sort of one Euro election or one set of local elections. Test after test, the Scottish nationalists, or those who at least want a second referendum...
They get very upset when you call them Scottish nationalists.
The Scottish National Party. But whether they're... I don't think the Greens are nationalists necessarily, but favour a second referendum. And this has been put to the test again and again and again. And it's succeeding again and again and again. And I would advise unionists in Westminster to say the way to solve this is to bring it on. Let's hold it now.
Sian, given that the English Green Party is totally separate from the Scottish Green Party, do you personally support Scottish independence?
I do. I think a country, once it reaches a certain size and confidence, and once it's clearly got a different outlook than its sister country, ought to be able to forge an independent identity when it does. I mean, the Greens in the European Parliament...
Just not Britain on Brexit.
Our group in the European Parliament is a lot of the sort of more independence and separatist type parties. We very much believe in that as a principle, so yeah.
Apart from Brexit, when Britain voted to go in.
But we want more international cooperation as well.
Right.
It's all about the right powers at the right level.
I was inviting you to go down a rabbit hole, but I shouldn't have done. Julie in Glasgow, what's your view to... I mean, I'm not sure your actual question really got much of an answer, but maybe you'd like to answer it.
Yeah, no, I just find it laughable, actually, because the Scottish Greens are pro-independence. And the question that the man said that, Scotland's mandate changed. Scotland's always wanted to be independent. It wouldn't have mattered what mandate they had. But what they seem to forget is there's millions of us voted for Brexit. And we do believe in independence, but not their vision of independence being tied to another political arena, shall we say.
Okay.
So, no, I didn't really get it answered, but never mind.
Well, I tried. Julie, thank you very much indeed. We'll come to more of your calls in just a moment. It's 8:45.
This is LBC.
Sean Berry, Mark Littlewood, Simon in Southampton, Erin in Scarborough with us answering your questions. We have a text question here from Brandon in Solihull. The Premier League has announced players from all teams will take the knee during the coming season. Could footballers send a stronger message that they're out of touch? Simon?
Can I very quickly just refer back to Mark on the last question about
I'd rather you didn't. I mean, we've kind of finished that now.
Well, it's just he made a strong statement there about me not reading books or reading books, implying that I was lacking in some kind of education.
I don't think that was his intention at all.
You said that you weren't sufficiently informed in 2016, and now you consider yourself to be.
Yeah, but I wasn't back then, and that's part of the problem. I had a very, very good, stable upbringing, a normal upbringing, but the only influence the EU ever had on me in my life that I knew about was from the Sun newspaper. That's the only narrative that was fed to me.
Well, all right.
Simon, just respect the fact we're moving on now, if you would, to the question about taking the knee.
No problem. I don't have any problem with people taking the knee. If they feel that's something that they need to do to show and to raise awareness to what's happening, fine, brilliant, keep doing it.
Why do you think Brandon thinks that if they do that, they're sending a strong message that they're out of touch?
Well, what does that mean, that they're out of touch? Surely...
Well, I suppose, I mean, we haven't got him on the phone, so I can only surmise what he means by that. I suppose he thinks that they're out of touch with public opinion, and public opinion is very much of the view that this, if it had a place last season, the point was made and that it should stop this season.
Well, they're out of touch with maybe some public opinion. And if it's an act that they want to do to continue to raise awareness, that's absolutely fine. That should be encouraged. What harm does it do to anybody, right? And at the end of the day, the fact that it gets under people's skin is, one, a good thing, but two, it proves that it's keeping the issue alive and making people talk about it. So, yeah, carry on.
That's a very interesting point, because we're going to be doing our 9 o'clock phone-in on this subject. And on that, Gillian has texted in saying, I watched the Arsenal versus Chelsea friendly on Sunday. When the players took the knee, most of the crowd applauded enthusiastically. It was wonderful to see. I think, Sean Berry, the fear is that the fact that crowds will be back in the grounds this season might lead to a lot of booing when players take the knee. I think that's possibly a fear, given what happened in one or two of the England matches in the summer.
I think that fear underlines why it's so important to carry on demonstrating that you as players, as clubs, are anti-racist. And that's what, very simply, this gesture, this symbolic gesture of taking the knee does. And I think, as Simon has just pointed out, what harm does it do? You know, it's a thing you do. You listen to the national anthems before national games. You take the knee before a match to make the point that you as a club are anti-racist and you don't want racism in your grounds. And until football and the wider society doesn't have a problem with racism anymore, we should continue to do everything that we can all of the time. It's like saying that, you know, Black History Month is in October, I think, so therefore don't talk about it at any other time of the year. It's so important that we embed Black history into our curriculums. We review how we're looking at these things all the way through the year now. These things can't be put in boxes. They're part of our daily lives and our daily struggles.
Mark, you're a Southampton fan, big football fan. What's your view on this?
My worry is, to address Sean's point, footballers are not doing everything they can all the time. There is a danger that this is just a meaningless gesture. If you are serious about racism, genocide and social justice, there is absolutely no way you're going to Qatar to play for England in the World Cup. You will be almost literally playing on a field with the bodies of slaves underneath it, if not literally, certainly metaphorically. There is no way, as a professional footballer, you will accept any money from any Chinese company, a government that is engaged in something approaching genocide. I think we've lost the plot here. I can remember when I first started following...
Isn't that all a bit of whataboutery, though?
Well, if we're going to do something serious, let's do something serious.
Are you genuinely suggesting doing that? Because that is the next... This is the point. You go on a journey, you take all the steps until we get to where we want to be.
I think it's a slightly feeble first step. Racism, there is a problem with racism in football. Iain, you're a long-standing football fan like myself, but I'm sure you'll remember going back 20 or 30 years. I mean, it was horrific. I mean, the National Front, as I think then was, would recruit people from outside grounds. I mean, bananas thrown at black players. I'm not saying that racism's gone. I'm saying it has improved enormously in favour of racial equality now. I could not really imagine being at a Southampton game in which anything other than one or two idiots would criticise a player for being black. I mean, it just doesn't... Football fans are increasingly colourblind. So if we're going to take a stand, let's take a serious stand. Let's not take money from Qatar and Chinese sponsorship, millions of pounds of it, and believe that we can assuage our conscience by taking a knee and applauding it. Let's do this properly, not by a symbol, but by action.
Erin.
I have to 100% agree with Mark.
That's always
it's all very well getting down on your knee. That's fine if that's what you want to do, but there have to be other things going on. As he says, look at the sponsorship, look at where the money's coming in, always follow the money, and look at the sort of hypocrisy in those countries where you're taking that money from Uyghur, Muslims and so on. Why would you take money from China for sponsorship and then get down on your knee? It's kind of hypocritical.
Well, talking of China, we have a question on that from Mark in Chelsea. Mark, go ahead, please.
Evening, Iain. Now, what I'll ask your panel is that what's gone on with this pandemic is that we blame our governments all the time, not just us. Everyone around the world is fighting this pandemic, and every government and all these people, anti-factors, are going up in arms. It's causing trouble around the world. The blame should be put on China. They understood what went on there, and they know what they did.
So what's the question?
That is the question, Iain, is because it's really strange. It was in Wuhan where it all started from, and when we had this lockdown, all of us, Beijing carried on like I said, nothing had happened.
All right. Well, you haven't actually, Mark, you haven't actually asked a question, so I'll paraphrase it for you. I suppose it's when do we stop blaming our own government for COVID and start blaming China? Sian.
So I think there is a danger here that we're sort of that we're leaking into other areas here. We started talking about fighting racism in football. You've mentioned China in relation to some of the human rights abuses in China, and we have a caller calling in now, sort of putting some abuse on China, essentially. And I'm not sure that is a very healthy conversation to be having. I do agree.
Why is that not healthy?
Well, there are lots of different kinds of racism out there, and I would worry that we can't just start making accusations about China in general
in the Chinese Communist Party,
in this debate. But I think exactly. We need to be talking on a serious international level about human rights abuses. But in terms of the pandemic, I mean, what we've been handed by the spread of this virus around the world, however it happened, is a very clear, practical, domestic question around public health and how we manage it. And we are right to criticise the government for its mismanagement of a public health crisis, however it arose. The fact that they didn't organise well the testing and tracing. They've done well on the vaccines, but on almost nothing else, including support for people's incomes, which they've just withdrawn this week. They've put industries into chaos.
I'm conscious of the time.
The furlough. So, we can criticise the government, and we shouldn't just be hurling blame around at China indiscriminately.
I'm going to ask for short answers, please, from everyone else. Mark.
We've got to get to the bottom of what happened. We don't know what happened from China. Sean's right, we shouldn't blame the Chinese. I think there's a big question about whether the Chinese communist authoritarian government was partly to blame on a cover-up, but that's not blaming the Chinese in some racist way, that's blaming an administration. It's always a tough hand to deal with, a pandemic. I also agree with Sean, some missteps, some good steps. No country in the world has dealt with it perfectly. But I think we need to learn the lesson of what really happened at the outset to make sure that never happens again. And that does mean asking questions about what happened in China, not of the Chinese people, but of the Chinese authoritarian communist government that exists there.
Erin.
Yes, I would agree with Mark there, because their questions have to be asked about a weapons-grade laboratory in Wuhan and whether something did come from that and whether the cover-up meant, obviously, a massive pandemic globally because of their inability to close that down quickly.
Simon?
It happened. Obviously, we know it happened. When we say China, are we talking about the country? Are we talking about their people? No. But it did happen. Thank God it's not one that is more deadlier, because otherwise then things would be 10 times worse. So until it is actually proven that this was an act of an act of deliberate an action from the Chinese government, it's just an accident that has happened. It could have happened anywhere. And as far as our government goes, well, so corruption, cronyism, lies, misinformation, deflection. What more do you want? You tell me that you give me a good reason why I should not blame our government for the situation that we are in now. That is terrible, and that is what needs to be changed. If you can prove this pandemic was an act of deliberate malice, then fair enough. We'll point all the fingers we can at China and get it sorted out.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Simon. Don't forget, if you missed any of today's programme or missed any of our previous Cross Questions, you can go to the Cross Question podcast and download the back catalogue to your heart's content. Simon in Southampton, Erin in Scarborough, Sian Berry, Mark Littlewood, thank you very much for joining us on Cross Question tonight. It's 9 o'clock on LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, British officials have warned of a potential hijack of a ship off the coast of the United